My name's Kevin Gosden. I'm the father of Andrew Gosden, who went missing on 14th September 2007. Yeah, so these photos are Andrew at just an hour old. I was present for both of my kids' births, and I have to say, I mean, that's just one of the most amazing experiences I think anybody can have, is seeing their own child born. And like Andrew coming along, we already had a girl, and it's just like amazing, like, yeah, I've got my lad now. It's, you know, just the most exhilarating feeling really that I can think of. Yeah, he does look cute, all snuggled up like that. Like I say, it's kind of being present at your, well, probably any birth, but your own child in particular. I mean, I just think it's one of those awesome experiences that kind of makes you part of the human race. This photo is Andrew, he was 4 here, with his older sister Charlotte, who was 6 in this photo. And I've just picked this one out because they're playing, it's a little bit dark, but they're playing with a marble run thing where you connect lots of plastic tubes, wheels, slides and stuff together, and marbles shoot round it and whiz round in exciting directions. And Charlotte is 30 now, and we have our grandson each Friday at the minute. And I recently got this same toy out for him. It was one that I kept, just in case kids came to visit, you know. You know, so our little grandson absolutely loves it as well. And it's really, I mean, that's one of the things, sort of passing it down the generations almost. But Charlotte sort of said, yeah, oh, that brings back memories of building the thing, and then it'd collapse because you'd knock into it by mistake or whatever. But yeah, they really loved playing with that one, and it's nice to kind of get it out of its box and play with it again now with another little one. So this one's Andrew at age 8. We were on holiday here in Tunisia, and he is standing on half a dozen ostrich eggs, which he also sat on an ostrich and fed the ostriches. But, you know, it's just you wouldn't think it was possible, would you, that you wouldn't think it was possible that ostrich eggs were tough enough to stand on. But I stood on them, and so did my wife, and they didn't break. And that's Andrew's go. But and I still remember that as just an amazing, amazing time. We, as part of our tour, we did a camel trek thing around the Sahara, and I will never forget standing outside the hotel in the middle of the desert, well, on the edge of the desert, the night that we were staying there with the kids, and it just happened to be a full lunar eclipse, and it was just amazing standing in that space watching an eclipse of the moon with no street lighting and rubbish to phase it out. But yeah, we had a great time, and one of Andrew's sort of hobbies, if you like, and interests was collecting rocks and minerals, and round the mountains there he bought quite a few to bring back. I've still got some on his shelves upstairs, like bits of volcanic glass and stuff. Desert rose as well, got some of that he liked and brought back from there with him. But yeah, it's just one of those really lovely family times when you've got a whole fortnight just to be together and enjoy yourselves and have fun. This one again is another holiday we took. Andrew will be 12 in this one. You can't see his face, of course, because his back's to you. I think what I really like about this photo is it's just Charlotte and Andrew together, as they so often were. And I've always felt, after Andrew's been missing, that Charlotte lost a best friend as much as a brother. And it's just so typical of them. They just never scrapped or fought or argued like a lot of brothers and sisters do. I can remember doing that with one of my sisters. You know, they were always comfortable with each other, at ease, talked about anything and everything. I mean, we were sort of very old-fashioned, I suppose you'd call it, in that, you know, we'd always, after school and work and whatever, we'd always sit and eat our meals together. And I remember having the kitchen redone, because it was falling to bits, all the units. And, you know, we were discussing it between us, and I said, do you think we could fit a dishwasher into the space in this little kitchen? And Charlotte and Andrew just went, do you know what? Don't want one. Because we always do the dishes together. That's our talking time. That's, you know, that's just part of our kind of family time. Go, I had a rubbish day or a good day, or this happened or that happened. And no, we don't want to swap that for a machine. So we still don't have a dishwasher. Other than the wife, of course.
I'm Sarah Godwin. I'm the mother of Quentin Godwin, who went missing in New Zealand in May 1992 when he was 18 years old. I'm looking at a black and white photo of Quentin when he was probably about 18 months old, and we were living in England at the time, in the New Forest. And just looking at him, he's got gorgeous curly blonde hair. He was the perfect little baby because he was chubby, he was placid. He was my second child, so I was very appreciative of having a placid child. And he was generally a happy baby and a happy little toddler. In this photo, he's looking up at the sort of up at the camera, up at the person behind the camera probably, and he's got a lovely little smile on his face with his long golden curly locks. He and his sister were close in age. They were about 16 months apart. They were good playmates most of the time. Like children, they also squabbled, but this was before we left England to go and live in New Zealand. So it was sort of, it was a time with some pain attached because I didn't want to leave England particularly. My parents adored having the children close by, but we did. We left in 1975 when Q was 2 years old. So it's probably his last summer in England. I've got a photo now of all the family, and that's my 4 children plus my stepson and my stepdaughter, and my husband's in this photo. And it's taken on Quentin's 10th birthday, so that would be July 1983. And we're on the beach. This is a lovely beach area in New Zealand called Cornwallis, where we often used to go with the children because it had an amazing big grassed area that you could have picnics, and we've got a barbecue cooking in the background. So I'm sure we had something hot to eat. There's probably a very homemade chocolate cake on the table. And so other objects which I can't quite make out what they are. They look like oranges, but I can't think I took oranges on a birthday picnic. And I can see our little dog's ears sticking up in the corner above the table. So Q's sitting there with his stepbrother, who was his best friend from the age of 3 on one side of him. Then there's his 2 little sisters, and behind his 2 big sisters with his stepfather. I just noticed his stepfather is wearing a jumper, which I hand-spun all the wool and knitted it for him. It was a real labour of love. He may even still have it. So yeah, I'm sure that was a really enjoyable occasion for all the family, because it's somewhere we knew well, and it was a very happy place to be, although Q's birthday was July. So in New Zealand, obviously, that's winter time, which is why we've got jumpers and clothes on, thick clothes on. I've obviously been taking this photo because I'm not in it. But it's a lovely one to look at with all the family when they were young and happy and together. The photo I have now is of Quentin sitting in a garden chair in my parents' garden. This is August 1990, when all the family had come to England to celebrate my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. So that was us from New Zealand, 5 children and parents, my older brother from America with his wife and 2 boys, and my brothers in England. So it was a big family gathering, the one and only time we all ever got together. And the garden was lovely. It was my children's sort of favourite place to be in England, because they did get to stay with my parents quite a lot, considering we were in New Zealand. Quentin and his older sister Emma had come over on their own and stayed for about 6 weeks when they were 11 and 12, and my younger children also had come over as unaccompanied. So they knew Petworth and they knew the area really well, and loved to go over the wall and into Petworth Park. And Quentin at this stage would have been 17. And he looks really relaxed and chilled out and happy. He's just looking over his shoulder with a nice expression on his face. The reason this photo sort of speaks to me so often, it's one of my favourite photos of Quentin, is that it was A, taken in my parents' garden, which was, as I say, a happy place, but B, I suppose it was the last summer before he became fairly seriously ill with bipolar problems, and it was on the journey back to New Zealand after this trip that we stopped off in Malaysia for 5 days, I think, as a family. And Quentin, I know, was entertained one night by this Malaysian guy who'd offered to be our guide, and you could smell the dope coming out of the hut that they were in. We were in a campsite, and it's my guess that that strong dope was probably what triggered his bipolar problems, because it was not long after we were back in New Zealand living at home again that Q started to show signs of being manic. He suddenly sort of seemed to have these bursts of energy where he'd start a project in the garden or in the house or a school project or something, and he'd sort of say, I'm going to do this, this and this, and we all thought, that's amazing, yeah, go for it. But then he'd never finish it before he got on to the next one, and it took a few weeks to realise that things weren't quite as good as they seemed, and he was diagnosed as bipolar and had a severe manic episode about 4 months after we got back from England. So this is sort of a photo of the before time when life still seemed to hold all sorts of possibilities for him. So it's both a sad and a happy photo. All right, I have my photo now of Quentin sitting at our dining table. And I'm guessing it's a special occasion because there seems to be quite a lot of food. I don't think it's Christmas, but I can't tell from this photo. He's got a tin of Steinlager in front of him. And it's just a photo of Quentin, nobody else is in the frame. And he's looking very thoughtful, looking down and looking, I don't know if I can say he's looking depressed, but he's certainly looking a little isolated. I wouldn't have a clue what was going through his mind, but I think this was taken in probably late 1991, which would be about 6 months before he went missing. And it's probably showing that his mood generally was not a happy one, because he'd had the manic episode and he'd been diagnosed as bipolar, which he found very difficult for a teenage boy who's trying to fit in with his peers. To know that there's some mental illness in those days, and probably still nowadays, is a hard one to live with. So he didn't find it easy after his illness, even when he was apparently normal again. And I think this photo sort of epitomizes the fact that here's a young person who doesn't look as carefree as he maybe should. He looks fairly woebegone, thoughtful. And at this time, Q, I think, was trying to help himself by being very involved with the outdoors. He did a lot of gardening at home. We had a big garden. He loved growing vegetables, and he loved keeping bees. He'd kept bees since he was 11 years old, when he'd had a hive for his birthday present at his request, and learnt beekeeping from a cousin down the road. So he was trying his best to find natural therapy in the outdoors, in his bees, but I think it was still a struggle. And looking back, I wish we had realised how much of a struggle it was for him, because he could have done with more help than he got. But in those days, very little was really read or said about manic depression, bipolar, whichever they called it. But definitely for Q it was a difficult road, and this photo is rather a sad one.
My name is Anthea Langelaan, and my son Cian went missing in Ireland in 2020. So this is a photograph of Cian when he was about two and a half, with my sister, and we were in Bristol. We were visiting from Ireland, and it just reminds me of the fun times we had. I think sometimes, because Cian's life as a teenager, or just before he went missing, was not a very happy time. It's important for me to remember the happy times, and this was one of those happy times. doing silly things like my sister putting on a false moustache and Cian putting it on his chin instead of underneath his nose, and it just reminds me of fun times that we had together. This is a photograph of Cian holding the parasol for my mother, his grandmother, and it just reminds me of the 5 years that she had as a grandmother, and how happy she was that he came into our lives. And that day we were at the Bristol Zoo, and my mother wasn't really able to walk very well because she had problems with her feet, and so I said, well, that's not a problem, we'll take a wheelchair. Now, she was not happy about taking a wheelchair. She didn't want to be seen in a wheelchair, but agreed that if it was a question of going out with her grandson and having a wonderful day looking at animals and sharing a lovely day with him, or not doing anything at all, that she decided yes she would swallow her pride and be pushed around in a wheelchair. And actually it was a lovely day, and Cian had time on her lap being pushed around as well, and we just had a very, very happy memory of that day. And it wasn't long after that my mother passed away, so I'm so happy to have those memories. Oh, this is a lovely photograph. I particularly like it because of Cian's jazzy T-shirt that somebody sent to me from America, and he loved it because it was so brightly coloured, and he looks happy. He looks he's looking into the camera. I'm not, but he is, and that's how I like to remember him. He was a happy child, and he had a happy childhood, and things just went pear-shaped when he was at college, and around about the age of 18 he started to not be so happy and worry about the world, and so it's important for me to look at these photographs of when he was a contented child. So this photograph is the most recent photograph, the last photograph, if you like, that I've seen. I almost don't recognise Cian in this photograph because I never saw him with such long hair and a beard. He did grow his hair once when he was at college studying music, and he was part of a rock band, and so I saw him with a big shock of hair, but never with a big beard as well. So I hardly recognise him, but I just love it because of his eyes. And as I say, I've never seen him look like this, but I hope I will. Oh, sorry, I can't do this.
My name is Denise Horvath Allen. I'm the mother of Charles Carolee John Horvath Allen, who disappeared without a trace while visiting Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, aged 20, in 1989. He disappeared sometime between May 26 and possibly August. We don't have a definite date. The last confirmed sighting was May 26, 1989. This photograph is when he was a toddler in 1970, July. We travelled to Budapest, Hungary to visit his great-grandparents, who sadly were still there after the uprising in 1957, where the rest of his family, his father, his grandmother, aunts, all escaped from the country and lived in different parts of the world. When Grandma saw us at the gate, she knew who he was. She recognised him, even though we didn't speak the same language. We managed in various other languages, and we visited for a few days. And it was absolutely magic, because since 1957, no member of the family had been to see the grandparents in all that time. In this picture, it's one of the very difficult days of my life, absolutely heartbreaking. It was a day he went away to prep school. When he was 3.5, he was diagnosed as hyperactive, and it was quite difficult to manage his hyperactivity. And so the government subsidised the fees for him to go to boarding school. I always wanted him to go to prep school, but when the day came, it was pretty tough. At the beginning, you're not allowed to visit for several weeks till they settle in, and then they come home exits every so many weeks. So we were back and forth, and then we were allowed to visit on weekends, which we often did. And the picture of my mum here, it's one day we're at school visiting. The headmaster pulled his hair out with Charles one day. He decided to set off in his go-kart on Ilkley Moor, and the headmaster couldn't catch him. So we were in the doghouse. But he had many happy days there. And had a little garden. They used to do gardening, and had a swimming pool. It was very cold on top of Ilkley Moor. As the baby years passed, and the toddler years, and the early days, we then come into the punk era, the teenage years, which were quite daunting to deal with. Shaved heads, punk hairstyle. Here's where his 16th birthday, I got him a new suit. It's absolutely immaculate. But at home, as he's trying to find his own identity, he's wearing the latest punk gear, with jackets with sleeves cut off, t-shirts with sleeve cut off, and came home one day with this atrocious tattoo, which was quite proud. In your face, always in your face with the tattoo. Very difficult era, because of the state of his attire. He'd be asking to borrow something. Mum, have you got some pants I can borrow? Have you got whatever I can borrow? And of course, at that time, we were probably the same, similar size. It resulted in the end, I'd buy corduroy trousers and, oh, can I borrow these? And in the end, well, you can keep them. The only way I could get him to have some decent clothes to put on occasions. He was very proud being his punk with his Mohican hair cut. Just about died. See him stood on end. But him and his friends, that's the era they lived in and eventually grew up. Wish I had him here now, even with his tattoo. Well, after his punk era, started to grow up and decided to travel in Europe and go fruit picking. The next thing we know, we've got a phone call. Mummy, I'm going to join the Foreign Legion. What? Yes, I'm going to join the Foreign Legion. Oh, my mum and I nearly had a heart attack. But, as true to his word, this is what he did. And here, he's got leave for 4 days. And we enjoyed 4 days skiing together. I met him in Grenoble train station, and there he was in his full uniform, an overnight bag, looking just like in a Humphrey Bogart movie. Disappointed he should have had a young lady meeting him. Instead he had to put up with Mum. And we travelled back to the ski resort and had 4 amazing days and nights together. And as usual, borrowing again, he's got my sunglasses on, my ski jacket, and the salopettes I think we shared. And on one day he's going up in the ski lift and I'm coming down, and he's shouting out from the ski lift, "Mummy, Mummy, wait for me!" And absolutely died laughing, because as he came flying down the slope, and it splat in the ice. And he wasn't a wet lettuce. It was his term of endearment, calling me mummy. He was 6 foot tall, handsome young man, and he stood on his own, and it was such an honour to hold his arm. And then, sadly, as all good things, 4 days come to an end, and I take him back on the bus to Grenoble for him to go back to the Legion. He told a friend in Canada, "You don't know how much I wanted to go home with my mum," but I'd gone to do a job and I was there to stick it out. So we used to speak every Sunday from a payphone, and if we missed one Sunday, it would be another Sunday. And of course, many letters used to come home, and the envelope was embossed with the Legionnaire Army on it. It was, "Mummy, I'll make you proud of me." And I said, "Darling, I'm already proud of you." And he was so proud when he got his Kepi Blanc. And then eventually, when he'd done his stint there, after a year, he came home. And while he was trying to find his feet, what he was going to do next, we discussed about what was he going to do for his 21st, and he talked about going to Canada to see his natural father, just what next in life. So we arranged for him to go. It was an early 21st present, his ticket. He had sufficient funds for 3 months, and he was born in Canada, so he had a social insurance number. If he got work, he could stay longer. And in between, we kept chatting about his 21st. At the first point, "Mummy, will you come to Canada?" Of course. But dreading the thought, as it was so expensive to go to Canada and pretty bleak climate there. Then when I flew out in the December of 1988 to see him in a fashion show, strutting stuff on the catwalk, he discussed his birthday again. And at that point he said, "Oh, I'm going to come home, Mummy, for my birthday. We'll go out in London." And I said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "Well, why are you coming on such a date if you've only got a week off work?" And he said, "But I've got to get over my jet lag." "Jet lag at your age?" And he said, "Mum, you're 40 on the 17th, and life begins at 40. No matter how hard I tried to convey his thoughts and feelings to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, nobody wanted to hear. So, time to come home. Took me to Dorval Airport, which was pretty tough as well. My late sister-in-law, Eleanor, came to pick us up at the hotel and took us to Dorval Airport, where she left us on our own to say goodbyes. It was pretty tough. Obviously, I didn't want to come home without him, but that's life. And home I came, and he continued on his adventures across Canada. Went to see his father in Ontario and his godfather in Northern Ontario, both of whom have passed away. His journey then took him across Canada, Swift Current, where he cashed a cheque at the bank. The teller, years later, recalls his beautiful smile. And then I get a phone call in April, reverse charges, which thinking, oh my goodness, I was doing a facial on a client and I've got this reverse charge call coming in. So I'm saying, "What's your number? I'll call you back. Tell me your number, I'll call you back." "I don't know," he said. So we had a 20-minute conversation at reverse charges, and we suggested about maybe meeting up in Hong Kong, where I'd grown up, for his birthday, and I could show him where I'd gone to school and where we lived and the memories. I said, get your act together, find how much the ticket is to Vancouver to Hong Kong and let me know. So from there he travelled to Kelowna, his last fateful stop, Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada. It's in the beautiful Okanagan Valley. He arrived on the 3rd of May full of hopes and dreams. He slept in City Park the first night. The second night he sourced accommodation at the Gospel Mission and registered at student job agencies to source work. On the 11th of May I received a full-page fax from him and telling me about his job prospects and how much the ticket is from Vancouver to Hong Kong. And he telephoned his father to say, I'm going to meet Mum and Stuart in Hong Kong for my birthday. And Mum, send me the home fax number, please. Call Emma, a friend of his from school. And sadly, that was the last contact I had from him. I was waiting for his phone call to come any day, so it enabled me to book the tickets. But that phone call never came. By the end of the month, I was pretty frantic. Had we not been arranging to meet up for our birthdays, I wouldn't have worried so soon. But because, I had to book the tickets and make arrangements, it was just really strange that I hadn't heard from him. So I telephoned the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Kelowna Detachment, and asked them if they'd seen my kid in town. Being hyperactive and a bit clumsy and whatever, I'm sure they would have tripped over him somewhere. A very small town. But unfortunately, my phone call wasn't met with kindness, and they didn't want to know. If he's over 18, he don't want to call his mum, he doesn't have to. And sadly, this was the attitude that remained. My international long-distance telephone calls continued from May through to August. Not one word of empathy from the authorities. I was a pain in their side. Eventually, on the 10th of August 1989, I insisted they take a missing person report on my child. Reluctantly, they did. File 1989217884 was created. And the phone calls continued, and the faxes and the pleas. To no avail. Then we realised that the police weren't going to look for him, so we made arrangements that we would go and look for him ourselves. And my mum and I set out the following year to backtrack his movements in Canada. I'd planned to spend 4 days in each town he'd visited, but having arrived in Kelowna, the things I learned, we ended up staying there for a month. My mum had to fly back home to England to go to work. I continued the journey across Canada in case there was something I'd missed along the way that might give us some answers to where he might be. The second trip, I named the trips. The second trip's the body trip. It wasn't until 1992 we were able to make financial arrangements to go back, and my intention was to spend 4 weeks in Kelowna following up the leads we'd got to try and establish what had happened to him. After 6 weeks, 5 weeks, we received anonymous letters saying that he'd been killed at a party at Tiny Tent Town campsite and he died and his body was in the lake. Lake Okanagan is 98 miles wide, bottomless in parts. It's one of the deepest and coldest in the world. Local volunteer divers went into the lake to search for Charles beneath the floating bridge for 3 days. On the 4th day, they were joined by International Sea Search from Vancouver and their volunteer team, aided with a submersible camera that cost $1,000 a day to rent. On the 6th day of the search, the dive team and their volunteers found a body. On the 5th day of the search, the police decided to get involved in the dive and they joined my team. For unknown reasons, on the 6th day, they weren't present. My team were on the lake from dawn to make the most of the daylight hours, and at 10:14 they found the remains of a gentleman. They called the police. The police arrived at the lakeside at 10:17. Took them 3 minutes to get there. Police divers went in, bagged and recovered the body from the lake. On Friday, April 3rd, 1989, the Kelowna volunteer divers with International Sea Search volunteer team discovered a body at 10:14 beneath a floating bridge in Okanagan Lake. After they notified the police and their divers came to assist in the recovery of the body, I was in my motel. My team had asked me to stay away from the lakeside as it was difficult enough emotionally looking for my son. I did as they asked. Around 2:20 in the afternoon, the police screeched up to the motel, to my room, and 2 officers came to tell me that a body's been found. I just looked at them dismissively. I was so tired and so afraid. I just couldn't really believe what they were saying. So they came into my room and advised me what a gentleman who'd been found was dressed in. And I said at the time, my son wouldn't wear that attire. You know, my grandfather would. Young Charles wouldn't. However, it was such a shock. We didn't know the events or how he'd ended up in the lake. So nothing could be done until the remains were identified. During the police visit to my room, there were tears. I went into the bathroom for some privacy and sat on the floor and cried, which I thought was quite normal of any parent. I didn't do anything melodramatic. I came out of the bathroom and just sobbed. The next thing I know, there's an ambulance outside my door waiting to take me away. I'm manhandled into the ambulance, strapped in. My mobile phones are removed from me and returned by the police to the rental company. At that time, why, I did not know. They wouldn't even allow me to get my toiletries, dressing gown, etc. I had agreed to go to the hospital because I just needed to go somewhere where I felt safe and quiet to be able to go to sleep. I had no idea what was in store for me. When we arrived at the hospital, I was put on a trolley in the emergency unit, formally dressed, and just in a waiting area. The manageress from the motel, who'd been a godsend during my stay there, she came with my dressing gown and toiletries, and they had to wake me up to put my PJs on. I was quite cold by this time. And then the nurse said, because the hospital are on strike downstairs, would I like to go upstairs? It'd be quieter up there. I didn't want to be a nuisance. I just wanted to go to sleep, so I agreed. Unknown to me, I was being taken up to the psychiatric unit, where I was kept for 3 nights. It was quite a shock waking up there, and at the side of my bed there were funeral cards, peanut butter cookies left, strange things in my room. On the Saturday, on the Sunday, a friend of Charles came to take me home for dinner and to do my laundry. As I was leaving the unit, they said, "Don't forget you've got to be back by 6. I realised then that I was in there voluntary, and if I wasn't back by 6, they might section me. Being alone in Canada, my husband in England, no mobile phone. You needed $7 in coins to ring England. So I went and had a nice visit. I was brought back to the hospital in time. The only way to find out what was going on was to listen to the news in the sitting room. So I would go from my room to the sitting room to watch the news. In the evening, on the way back to my room, the nurse shouted across the office and asked a question, and I thought she was asking about the insurance forms, and I said I've already filled them in, and it transpires she was telling me that the coroner's coming to see me. In shock, I fell to the floor. Why on earth would the coroner be coming to see me Sunday night in the hospital? At around 20 past 11, the coroner arrived in my room. He'd come to attain the details to complete a death certificate for the body of my child. I was in disbelief at this request. I said to him, "Have you identified him?" "No, but we're sure it's Charles." "Pardon? You've not identified him?" "No, but we're sure it's Charles." And this conversation continued, and I could not believe that they were asking for information for a death certificate when the body had not yet even been identified. In the end, I gave in and gave him the details. I felt I betrayed my son because I hadn't got him dead in my arms. I did ask where my son's body was. I hadn't made up my mind whether I would look at it or I just would look at it covered in a sheet. And the coroner tells me it's in the morgue downstairs. In disbelief, I'm there. I've been sleeping upstairs and my child's body's downstairs in the morgue. He tells me I'm not allowed to see the body. It's in a sealed unit. I don't understand why there was no priority on getting the remains identified, as they were brought to the surface by noon. It's only a 4-hour drive to Vancouver, where it could have been identified, on Friday. However, that wasn't to be. The remains were in Kelowna General Hospital, where I was. Early Monday morning, the remains went to Vancouver. Also, I ensured that I was allowed to go home, back to my motel. All day we were waiting. All day the news were announcing that what was believed to be the body of Charles Carolee John Horvat was found in Okanagan Lake beneath the floating bridge. Confirmation was expected, but then again we were expected to find out this afternoon, and this went on all day. At tea time in the Pandosi Motel, the coroner came to see me with a press release. I didn't know whether to jump in the empty swimming pool or run towards him. I was just in horror and said, is it good news or bad? And he said, it's not Charles. I had a press release timed 5:25 stating it's not the body of Carolee John Horvat. Around a week later, the remains were identified as an older gentleman, possible suicide.